Sometimes we need to go on a journey to find our home. We are all on a journey to find out who we are and where we came from. Something was drawing me to Kayak, Norway, to solve the mystery of my family roots along the fjords. A mystery that started on the old homestead in Iowa. It's called the Driftless. Glaciers from the last ice age missed this region and left behind a landscape of rolling hills and forests and streams. It wasn't like the homeland, but close enough to pause and then stay. This is where my Norwegian relatives settled in the 1850s near Decorah, Iowa. As a boy, when we gathered for family reunions, we had so much fun, hiking and paddling and fishing and eating. Uncle Lester knew every good fishing hole in the county and supplied walleye pike for the feasts. And Uncle Hoot, yep, Uncle Hoot, was the storyteller. My favorite tales were about my grandparents, Ole Ellingson and Helen Nessheim. Grandpa Ole juggled a business in town, farms in the countryside, and as county sheriff during Prohibition, kept the peace. Grandma Helen was the quiet matriarch who managed the household, feeding 11 hungry children during the Great Depression and sending them all off to college. Hoot affectionately called them the dear departed because they had each died before I was born. It felt like they were there with us as Hoot spun his yarns. In the 1850s, Ole and Helen's parents left the challenges of farming the rocky hillsides along the fjords of Norway and came to America. They came for a better life. They came for the American dream. What an amazing journey they had gone on across the ocean to come to this place along Canoe Creek. Canoe Creek flows into the upper Iowa River, which meanders into the mighty Mississippi River, where Uncle Lester took us fishing. About this time, I read Mark Twain's The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, and I began to dream of traveling on a raft down the river someday. That dream came true in 2012 when I launched my kayak from Lake Itasca in northern Minnesota, and for 2 months I paddled 2,300 miles down Big Muddy to New Orleans. What an adventure. I was hooked. As a boy, my family lived along another river, the Hudson, and I was fascinated by the Erie Canal. Once again, my dream became a reality in 2017 when I launched near Niagara Falls and I paddled the Erie Canal and Hudson River to the Statue of Liberty. Something remarkable was happening on these journeys. I found myself imagining my ancestors as they traveled these same waters on their journey to America. What did my great-grandparents leave behind in Norway? And what's it like today along those fjords? It felt like they were calling out to me, "Come to Norway, come and paddle, come and see." And so I began to imagine and plan an adventure in Norway. But rather than paddle solo, I decided to gather a crew of friends. We met up in Minneapolis. Each was a seasoned paddler. Each had Norwegian roots. Each was retired, and each said an enthusiastic "Ja, sure, you betcha" when I invited them to be a part of our Spirit of Norway team. Jim had paddled the Mississippi, climbed Mount Kilimanjaro, and as an engineer is a great detail guy. Ellen was the first woman to solo paddle the Mississippi and is a gifted artist who creates remarkable paintings and drawings. Brent has paddled the Missouri Breaks, does drone videography, and was once a rock and roll drummer. And I am Dave, pastor, professor, paddler, poet, who dreams big dreams and loves adventures. And so we took off. Our grand plan was to paddle for 1 month on my 2 ancestral fjords, 2 weeks on the Sogne or Sun Fjord, and 2 more weeks on the Hardanger Fjord, with our final destination, the Nesheim family farm near Granvin, that my relatives left to come to America over 150 years ago. It was raining when we arrived in Gudvangen. After a damp night in our tents, we were greeted by a cloudy morning. But a paddler arrived to let us know this was the very best weather because you paddle in the clouds and it's magical. The sun soon melted the clouds and we were savoring the rugged beauty of the Nerøy Fjord. We found a spectacular campsite near Dirdal along a rushing stream. Jet-lagged and paddle-weary, we were ready for sleep. About 4 a.m., I awoke in my tent to the roar of the nearby stream, squawking seagulls, and the persistent light of the midnight sun. But it was more than that. My mind was racing, a million thoughts. Why am I doing this? Can I do this? I wondered if my great-grandfather had the same fears when he began his journey to America. What happened next took our breath away. Sunrise on the Sun Fjord. After a day hiking up the glacier-carved valley, we met Bjarne and Ranveig. I started calling the people who helped us along the way our fjord angels. They invited us to share a snack of heart-shaped waffles. It was time we got back on the water, and the weather was cooperating as we launched. But how could a place of such peace and beauty change so quickly? Soon we were battling headwinds and waves bouncing and ricocheting off the cliffs, 2,000-foot cliffs, and water was seeping into my spray skirt. It was cold, icy water, and I was paddling in circles, and I finally yelled out to Brent, "Brent, come and check my rudder." So he came over, and he came alongside, and he said, "It's broken." So I paddled furiously into a little tiny cove and dried off, and there was a Norwegian couple there, and they said, "Go rudderless." I thought, of course. My broken rudder was taking me around in circles. And so I returned to the water rudderless, and without a broken wing, I continued to paddle to Undredal and on later to Flåm. There's a deeper lesson here. With the help of our next fjord angels, Daniel and Marta and Irvin from Njord Kayaks, we made our way to a campground in an ancient apple orchard. It may be called the Sun Fjord, but the rain and wind persisted the next day. So we toured the tiny village of Flåm, and in the evening caught the electric train up into the mountains to Myrdal.
The next stop is the waterfall.
One moment we were cursing the wind and the water and the waves, and the next all we could say was, "Wow," as we viewed a wonderland of waterfalls. I told Ellen as we got off the train, I sprained my wow. With a dire forecast of severe weather, our outfitters took us by road and ferry to Balestrand to create a base camp for future paddling. On the way along the fjord that was windswept with white caps, Irvin, our outfitter, warned us about the weather and willowas. Willowas? What is that? Willowas are winds that would sweep down from the mountain valleys into the fjords with such force they could snap the paddle out of your hands and capsize your kayak. We began to wonder, was this journey really a good idea? Our destination, Balestrand, turned out to be a quaint village with a long history as a gathering place for artists, drawn by spectacular scenery, illumined by an almost magical light.
I'm a paddler and I'm an artist, and that's who I truly am. The lighting here is totally different than what I'm used to. It's more subdued, and it's just, there's a richness in the colors here.
During a break in the weather, we enjoyed paddling outside Balestrand on the Fjorlands Fjord with farms and villages perched on rocky hillsides. Perfect paddling conditions. The surface was like glass. Our kayaks drifted, and we soaked up the surroundings. But we had learned by now that in Norway you can experience 4 seasons in a day. The rain and a cold wind returned, and so we rented a small cabin in Balestrand. And for several days, we waited. We had a lot of time on our hands, waiting for the weather to turn. So we pondered, we studied the maps, we debated our options, we walked, we went to the St. Olaf Kirke, and I said a special prayer for guidance. And we stayed close to shore. The wait was getting frustrating, but it slowly dawned on us. We were on vacation. Unlike our previous journeys, we were not an expedition with goals of many miles to paddle each day. Like those childhood family reunions, our Spirit of Norway goal was fun, enjoyment, savoring the place, the people, and the culture. We had to pause to remember. After several days, the rain stopped, and the most beautiful rainbow promised better paddling ahead. With revised plans, we prepared to finally leave Balestrand and launch again. A 9-mile paddle across the widest stretch of the Sun Fjord. Our spirits were high, and humor had returned as Jim and Brent waited for the tide to come in so we could get going. Jim had forgotten how to paddle, so he had to practice a bit.
Sometimes I have laughed so hard on this trip that the next morning my stomach hurts.
What began with calm water and laughter changed quickly into a white-knuckle experience in the widest part of the fjord. I almost capsized trying to use my GoPro camera. It was like being in a Hans Dahl painting. I tried to summon up the courage of my Viking ancestors, and I thought about my great-grandmother, who was only 17 years old when she sailed to America. Keep paddling, Dave. And save us, St. Olaf. We were relieved to reach the safe and protected harbor in the hamlet of Vik. After drying off and warming up, we were transported back across the mountains to the Nerøy Fjord. The weather forecast was promising, with warmer days and less wind, and we were returning to sheltered waters. A short paddle up the fjord, we found a fabulous campsite. The views were breathtaking. It was unreal.
Right now I'm drawing a sketch of the little hamlet that's across the fjord. Then in the background is the very dramatic lighting of the fjord and the softness of the water in the foreground.
For several days, we enjoyed shorter paddles and hikes as we explored this new home. One afternoon, when we returned to camp after a short paddle, It appeared our home had been invaded by a fleet of kayaks. As we approached, we learned that they were young adults with handicapping conditions, riding in tandem kayaks with guides, their own fjord angels. We were deeply inspired by these exceptional paddlers. Ellen presented Jan, their leader, with one of our Spirit of Norway patches. As we sat around the campfire one evening, Ellen shared how much she loved paddling and camping because she has her home on her back like a turtle. She has all her needs, she's traveling light, she can enjoy and be fully present to the natural world and everything she encounters. It was hard to leave the rugged beauty of the Norway Fjord, but it was now time to paddle the Hardanger Fjord, where my ancestors farmed for centuries. We immediately saw very different terrain, with more farms and orchards on the hillsides. The weather was warming, and paddling conditions were improving as the fjord was widening. An absolutely gorgeous day. Wonderful, wonderful day to be on the water. Our conversations were growing deeper. We shared what we were learning. We could be honest with our feelings.
It's challenging. It's challenging me in a lot of different ways as far as doing things outside my comfort zone, sleeping in a tent for a month, sleeping bag, but not to take anything away from all of this. It's beautiful here.
We had all been drawn to this place. Norway is a place of fierce and spectacular beauty. It's a beauty that invites and draws you in and begins to shape you. Home is place. Jim first heard about Norway in a 5th grade world geography class. He remembered pictures of fjords with mountains that started at sea level, then stretched and stretched into the heavens. It tugged at his heart. For him, this trip was truly a dream come true. Over and over again, we said, wow, as we paused and beheld the 3 F's: fjord, fjell, fossen, water, mountains, waterfalls. And we were reminded that in all our adventures, it's about the people, the fjord angels, those good folks who welcome us, take care of our needs, and inhabit the place with their customs and history and hospitality. Home is people. And now as we approached Granvin, I was excited to meet my people on the family farm near Nesheim. As we approached the family farm, I felt welcome. The ground, the land, the water, it was just so beautiful, and I felt like literally I had come home. When I called out, "I'm a Nesheim," Erling and Helga immediately invited us with a "Velkommen." And we sat for an hour or two, and it was like I'd come home and I was with family. We immediately began talking, sharing stories, laughing. We gathered on their deck to look in the book of family history. And we found great-grandpa Johannes' name in the list of family members who had gone to America. We had just met, but it felt like I had known them all my life. Ultimately, it's about the spirit of Norway. Home is spirit. what the locals called Friluftsliv, or fresh air life. You know, you're indoors, you're outdoors, you're with people, you're celebrating, you're hiking, you're climbing, you're paddling, you're breathing deeply, you are alive. It's what I experienced long ago by the waters of Canoe Creek on the family farm in Iowa. When we are alive, we see angels all around us, a cloud of witnesses. And maybe most of all, we can encounter the ancestors who I never met in person, but who called me and guided me on this journey. Long ago, I wondered if my great-grandparents were ever homesick for Norway. And I wondered what I'd discover when I went to the family farm. I now have some answers. I sat by the fjord one evening and I wrote this letter. Dear Grandma, as I sit beside this natal fjord, I think of great-grandpa Johannes. But most of all, of you, Grandma Helen. I wonder if you ever dreamed of your native land. Even though you were born in America and it became your home, did you wonder what your home was like on the Hardanger Fjord as you put on your native dress, the bunad, and made lefse and rummagrut and krumkake? As I traverse these holy waters, I have come to feel a deep connection with and a care for this place that was once home to my family. In a very profound way, it is becoming home to me. Home is where the heart is. I am home, Grandma, and I wish you were here. Your grandson, Dave.
Thank you. Mga tak.
Fjord, okay, let me just hit the button here. Got it. There were two outfitters, one in Gudvangen, which was called Njord Kayaks, and then the other one was in Flom, and they're listed. That all the information and the names of the contacts are listed in my Paddle Pilgrim book. But we were very fortunate to have good outfitters. Even though my rudder broke on the kayak, they came and replaced my kayak very, very quickly. And then when we had the inclement weather, they transported us on several occasions at a very reasonable cost. The Fjord Angels, that's a phenomenon I first experienced when I paddled the whole Mississippi River in 2012. I paddled 2,300 miles in 2 months down the Mississippi, and I coined that phrase river angels because I often had people I had no knowledge of help me out when I was in a jam or took me to town to get food. And then on the Erie Canal, I ran into canal angels, and maybe it's my faith connection, but I think that passage in the book of Hebrews where it says, we're surrounded by a whole cloud of witnesses, and be hospitable to the strangers, because you never know when you will entertain an angel unawares. And so our faith in humanity was restored, as well as our spiritual faith, by all the wonderful people who helped us over and over and over again on the trip.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Well,
What was
oh, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, what was your favorite food? Did your angels bring you food, or did you fish for your own food?
You know, it's interesting. We cooked almost all of our own food because we were wild camping. And so we brought freeze-dried and dehydrated food and cooked on our fires at night. But of just a quick fun story, we were in a little store. The 7-Elevens of Norway are called Joker, and but they're much, much nicer. And one day we had stopped in a little village and stopped at the Joker, and I looked in the cooler, and there was a package that said rummegrut, and I thought, oh, I want to have some rummegrut because my grandmother on a cold day would make rummegrut for us, and it's one of my favorite foods. This was not as good as grandma's, but it brought back lots of wonderful memories. The one other fun thing that happened with food, freeze-dried and dehydrated food is, after a while, you get a little tired of it, right? And I remember in another store, we looked in there and I saw a container that said smør. Well, we all know as Norwegians that smør, butter makes everything better, right? And good Norwegian cooking, or any cooking at all, if you add butter, it helps. So we then, from then on, and the rest of our trip, had at least 1 or 2 tubs of butter. So no matter what we made, we would take a dollop of butter and throw it in there. And it definitely improved our camp cuisine.
Did you fish along the way?
We did not fish. We were kind of mainly trying to get from place to place and get our camp set up. So, but we did see some folks fishing, and we did see some fish farms in several locations on the fjords, and the wildlife was abundant. We saw lots of birds. We saw fish. We actually saw porpoises. There's a greenish, brownish, dark colored porpoise that lives in the fjords, and called Nissa. And so we on several occasions would come around a bend, and in the distance we'd see these little small pods or little schools of Nissa breaking the surface, and we would always glide. And one of the great things about kayaking is you're so quiet that you can get very, very, very close. In the same Paddle Pilgrim book, I did snap a picture of the Nissa, and we were able to get very close to them and just enjoy the scenery as well as the wildlife.
You know, when I was there, I never felt like my pictures did the fjords justice. You know, you're there and you're just in that amazing awe of just being around that. And your pictures actually gave me goosebumps several times watching it. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the photography and what was involved in that.
Well, it's interesting. I'm sure you've all, with your photography, I used to do a lot of pretty serious 35 millimeter photography and have some good cameras. But in the last, 5 to 10 years, the quality of the cameras in our cell phones has really, really improved. And so most of the photographs that you saw in that presentation were taken with my cell phone. And I think a lot of photography is, like you were saying, if you have good subject matter and good scenery, that helps. And then knowing what good composition is, but the subject matter made it much easier. I had a GoPro camera, which I mounted, you could see several times, either looking forward or looking at me when I was paddling. And that's a nice tool to have. And you're able to do it with audio commands. So I'm paddling along and I can say, GoPro, shoot video, and it begins shooting video. And I'll be paddling along and I'll say, GoPro, stop recording, or take picture, or whatever. And so the technology has really, really improved. The drone images, which you saw, one of our group, Brent, from back in Minnesota, he brought along his drone, and he was able to get some great drone images. And so I think the combination of the GoPro, my little cell phone camera, and his drone, we were able to get close to the beauty, but the best way is to be there, right?
Are you planning any more paddling trips?
Well, yes, I actually, I did one this last summer. I went back to the Mississippi headwaters in northern Minnesota, and I'm writing my 4th Paddle Pilgrim book about that, and actually producing another film. And the one that I've had to postpone is on the Mekong River in Southeast Asia. I have several friends, and we actually have a corporate sponsor with an inflatable kayak company and a paddle company, and they are sponsoring us. And we're going to fly to Ho Chi Minh City and then up into Laos and paddle the Mekong through Laos and Cambodia and Vietnam. And so we were all set to go 2 years ago in March, and the pandemic hit. So that one is still on the drawing board. And as soon as the pandemic is a little more under control, part of the problem is those countries have been closed. And so when they open up and are a little safer, that's the next big adventure.
That sounds interesting.
Yeah. Did you ever capsize?
No, we didn't. We were very cautious. And as you could hear when I talked about my rudder breaking, the water is very cold and it can be very, very rough. And there were moments when we were very concerned, but we were fortunate. We had wetsuits that we could wear if it was particularly rough, but still in 50-degree or 52-degree water, you can't be in the water very long. But fortunately, we were all together, and we've been trained in self-rescue and in group rescue. So if somebody had gone over, we would have been able to help the other person out.
Did you say what month it was?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, good question. I was very intentional. And we went from the middle of June to the middle of July for a couple of reasons. One, less tourists. And 2, there's still a lot of snow on the mountains. And when there's a lot of snow on the mountains, that means the waterfalls are at their very best. So when we launched in Gudvangen, for example, on the Norway Fjord, which is a sub-fjord of the Sun Fjord, we could actually turn around in a complete circle and see 13 waterfalls.
Wow.
And hear them oftentimes. You're paddling along and you almost hear the roar of the water. So middle of June to the middle of July. That also meant in the early going, as you could see, we had some cold days. We actually had frost on our tents a few nights. But by the time we got to the Hardanger Fjord in July, it had warmed up. So it was in the 70s and still cool at night. But we decided to go at that time, and it felt like a pretty good choice.
Thank you.
How much did you learn about your farm that you visited for your family and the history of the farm? Were you able to learn more about it while you were there?
I already knew quite a bit, Dave, because my relatives in Decorah, Iowa, had done a lot of research on it. So I had read quite a bit. But what that added for me was just walking on the ground and seeing this beautiful, beautiful area. The gourd or the farm has been in the family since the 1400s, and so just to walk on the ground and to meet what would be a cousin of mine, Helga, and she grew up there, and to be able to just, as I say in the film, home is place, home is people, home is spirit.
Yes.
And all 3 of those came together when I was on the family farm, and wonderful, wonderful people. And they actually have a B&B. So they've said, when my wife comes back with me, they're going, and it's the old farmhouse, which is even better. We'll sleep in the old farmhouse that Helga grew up in. Just down the hill from their much nicer, more modern home.
That's great.
No, it looked like you pretty much had all the fjords to yourself. Is that selective photography, or is that was that really the case?
We were a little intentional, Maria, in that we tried to avoid the big places where there were huge cruise vessels. The one place where we ran into the cruise vessels is in the village of Flom. And I'm sure a number of you have been there, and that's where you catch the train up to Myrdal. One day while we were there, there were two huge cruise vessels, and it was almost comical. When we paddled into Flom, one of the cruise vessels, which was very large, was trying to turn itself around to leave. And we kind of just sat in our little kayaks, being very, very nimble in our travel, and watched this massive, massive boat spend an hour turning itself around so that it could leave the fjord. And so we waved at this vessel, and a lot of the people on the vessel waved at us. I'm sure they didn't envy us being in our little boat, but we didn't run into a lot of people, and part of that was being there earlier in June and not so late into July. But there's always boats traveling on the fjords, and we wanted to stay to some degree a healthy distance from them, so we wouldn't capsize. But it was fun to be there.
One other quick question. Like when you would pull up, and I guess you would hike into some of these little villages, did you, I guess you felt comfortable leaving your kayaks just unattended, or did you always have someone there, or is it a very secure feeling? Well,
we actually did feel very secure. I mentioned the phrase "free Luftliv," fresh air life, which is a classic Nordic phrase. There's another phrase, "Allemans retten," which means every man or every person's right. And Scandinavian countries are not as much into private property as we are in the United States. And so you can free camp or put up your tent literally almost anywhere. Now, you always ask the farmer, or you ask the person if you could camp there, and you can camp usually for 3 days. You return it to its original condition. You give thanks for your camping. And so whenever we camped, we felt secure because our boats were we had been welcomed by the people who were there, or we were in such remote areas that we didn't really worry about anybody taking the kayaks.
What are some of the things that you wish you brought but you forgot?
Oh my goodness. Well, until we got the smør, I wish I had butter a lot sooner, that's for sure. No, we really, one of the things that Jim and Ellen and Brent and I, we've done these long expeditions. We are planners, so we love to do research. Jim is actually a retired engineer, and you'll see in the Paddle Pilgrim book a packing list. And I rely upon his wisdom to make sure that we have everything related to paddling, related to health, related to food. We really plan ahead, and we really weren't surprised by anything. I think we generally were well prepared. I didn't bring any akavit. I should have brought along some akavit.
Just want to say you've sailed many, many miles, Dave, since our years together at Luther, which you may not remember, but we were together at Luther, and it's just good to see you again.
Oh, now that I look more closely, I see the recognition. Good to see you.
I was Ruth Kolbjornsen then, but yes, we were together at Luther. So
indeed. We should sing the Nordic or the Norse alumni, the Luther alumni song, right?
That's okay.
That's okay. Ruth, good to see you.
Hi, Dave.
Yeah.
I just want to say that it was such a nice program that you, the film that you created. I also want to thank Betty and Marvin for inviting me to this, to your meetings. But I'll be looking forward to seeing your film about Laos, which is where I'm originally from. So
where are you from in Laos? I'm curious.
Yes, I'm originally from Vientiane, the capital.
Aha.
Yes,
well,
so
I had several Laotian students when I was a professor, and I just loved the stories that they would tell. And so when I began planning this trip, they said, you need to go further up the river. You can't just go through Cambodia. So we're gonna fly into Paxi. And we'll launch in Paxi and then go to the falls, and we'll portage around that magnificent falls and the islands there. And I'm sure you know how beautiful that is.
Yes, the 4,000 islands or
yes,
4,000 islands. Yes.
Oh, it'll be fun. Well, thank you for mentioning that.
Well, let us know when you have the film. So we'll definitely look forward to that. But beautiful scenery from Norway, which is, I'm planning on visiting Norway. So I'm just really glad to have connected with this group.
Well, I'm glad you joined us today. And I'm really looking forward to traveling in Southeast Asia in a very different culture, but I know there will be angels along the Mekong as well.
Yes, we're a peace-loving society, so you'll meet friendly people there.
Yes, indeed. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
Dave, I was wondering why the water is pristine. I mean, it looks so clean, cleaner than the rivers that we have here. Why do you think that is?
Well, of course, they're tidal. I mean, the fjords are tidal. The mountains the fjords are as deep generally as the mountains are high, because they were carved out in the last ice age. And therefore, the natural vacuum or the natural plumbing moves the water in and out, which keeps them relatively clean. Although I have to confess, way up at the end of the Hardanger Fjord, we camped in a little village called Osa. And it's not on Rick Steve's tour, but I told Rick, who's a good friend and a neighbor here in Edmonds, about this afterwards. And he's Norwegian in background. I've done some programs on his radio show. I told him about Osa. And the sad thing about that was a lot of the detritus, just stuff, it'll blow up into that end of the fjord. And that's true of even here in Washington. If you get an area where there's a beach and the wind blows, I taught environmental ethics, and I'm very much an environmentalist, and we humans have not done a good job of caring for our planet, and we are a throwaway culture. And so anything I can do, and we can all do, to keep the planet clean and keep the water clean, and just make sure the good creation we have stays good for our children and our grandchildren. We've got a lot of work to do, but the fjords were a reminder of how beautiful things can be. And the Norwegians are very environmentally oriented. They over half of their cars are already electric. I drive a Leaf, an electric car, and I have an electric bike, and all of my stuff is electric. And they are now converting all of their ferries to electric. So the Scandinavian countries are a wonderful role model for us around environmental stewardship. And so I try to stay in touch with all of that, because they can teach us a lot about how to care for the planet.
What type of kayak did you have? How wide was it? How long was it? The reason I'm asking is I'm from Norway, and at 14, my cousins and I had kayaked up along the fjords, but they were homemade. They were made out of wood and canvas.
Okay.
And 38 years ago, I made my own, and it's canvas, and is vinyl coated canvas and wood.
Okay.
And it's 42 inches across the beam, 13 feet long. But looking at yours, it was very narrow, and I would say it's not very stable. So congratulations on not capsizing. But what type was it? How long and how wide?
Well, it was a Danish kayak. It was made out of roto-molded plastic, so we could drag it up on a rocky beach. They were 16 feet long. They had a rudder, and I honestly don't know the width, but they were remarkably stable, and we were very grateful for that. I have a little fleet of boats here at my home in the Seattle area, and most of them are ocean going, and they're 16, 17 feet long. And I also built a wooden kayak a number of years ago, and I've got a canoe. So I have the Viking spirit is alive in me. I've got a fleet of boats. So whenever I need to get on the water, I can choose between the boats.
Okay, thank you. That
welcome.
was a one person kayak, correct? Not two man?
That's correct. Yeah. And we were able to rent them, and they supplied us with the kayak, the paddle, spray skirt, jacket, wetsuits, booties, dry bags. And there are several of these companies that you can rent from, and we have all that information in the book. And I'd be glad if any of you want to follow up just after we've had this time together. My email address is paddlepilgrim@gmail.com. So drop me a note, and I can send you an autographed copy of the book, or I can send you more information if you have more questions. So feel free to email me, and the website that has information on all my books and films is paddle-pilgrim.com, paddle-pilgrim.com. So check it out. And the photography, I have photo galleries of my Mississippi River journey, my Erie Canal, Hudson River journey, and my Norway journey. So there's a lot of photographs you can see there that were not included in the Coming Home film.
Okay, thank you.
I was wondering if, as a paddle pilgrim, if you have any thoughts on Thanksgiving, since that's coming up next week.
Oh my goodness. Well, when I think of Thanksgiving, I think of just when I'm on the water, how grateful I am for the goodness of the creation and the abundance that we've all been given. And so I approached this coming celebration with both gratefulness for the native peoples in our country, and also for all the abundance of blessings of land that my immigrants came and were drawn to, and farmed and fished and lumbered. And I go into this season, it shouldn't be just a day or just a week. It should be a general spirit of gratitude. And so I take that spirit with me wherever I go. And when I'm in my kayak and surrounded by the beauty, as I said at the end of the film, I said, thank you. And of course, I could say Mangatak, or I can say Tusen Tak, or I can say Yerkle Tak, but you can't say Tak too many times.